a Green Fair Organic Market Cafe, as well as plantbaseddiet.org, Mom's Organic Market, and Evolution Vegan Academy. Thank you all for supporting this event. We are joined now by Carol again from the Exam Room podcast with PCRM, and Jean Baur, president of farmsanctuary.org. So welcome back, and I'll let y'all get started. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Gwen. I greatly appreciate it. What a magnificent day this is. I'm getting the opportunity to speak with so many just tremendous people, so many influential and inspirational people. And certainly Jean Baur from Farm Sanctuary is no exception. You are just continuing on this string of incredible people. Jean, welcome to the virtual Fairfax Veg Fest.
Yes, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
My first question to you is this: how are you doing with all of the madness that's outside your door right now?
Yeah, it's an interesting time. It's a surreal time, and I'm doing pretty well actually. Not traveling like I normally travel, which has pluses and minuses, and so I'm of course trying to look at the pluses of it. Being able to do some reading, a little bit more downtime, more time walking in nature, walking in the woods. My girlfriend is very much into mushrooms, so we've started looking for mushrooms and have been finding morels this time of year in Northern Virginia. So that's been nice. I've also been doing cooking, kind of re-upped my interest in lentils. So that's been kind of nice. So it's trying to make the best of being home a lot.
I just had lentil soup for lunch during one of the breaks here. It was tremendous. So I'm glad you're on board the lentil train.
Yes. Yes.
Talk to us a little bit about the work that Farm Sanctuary does. You guys are really doing some really tremendous efforts over there.
Yes. Well, we started back in 1986 to expose the abuses of factory farming, and we were investigating farms and stockyards and slaughterhouses, and would find living animals literally in trash cans or on piles of dead animals. So we started rescuing them, and we now operate sanctuaries in New York and California for rescued farm animals. We're actually doing virtual tours of the farms now that we're not able to host people in person, which hopefully we'll be able to do before too long. But in the meantime, people can check out our website, farmsanctuary.org, and there are regular tours of the farms, both in New York and California. We also work to educate people, and we're doing virtual education programs. And we work to change policies and advocate for a different kind of food system, one that is plant-based as opposed to this factory farming system. And so now with this pandemic and the government spending trillions of dollars, hundreds of billions going into agriculture, we're hoping that some of that money can be shifted away from enabling industrial animal production and actually be used to start promoting more plant-based agriculture, more localized agriculture, instead of perpetuating this industrial, consolidated, unhealthy food system that is actually not very resilient. And I think some of the cracks in it are becoming more apparent now. For example, many a few slaughterhouses now have been shut down because people that work in them are sick. And it just sort of, I think, speaks to the fragility and the lack of resilience in our current system. So I'm hopeful that people are reflecting, thinking about the way we live and how we eat and our food system, and we can come out of this with ideas about improving things and creating more resilience, a healthier food system. Because a whole other issue is that, when we eat food that increases our risk of heart disease or diabetes or other health problems, we're more susceptible to COVID-19 or other diseases. So there's so many issues now that are kind of surfacing, and I'm just hopeful that we learn and can make some improvements that frankly have been long overdue.
Before we talk about the sanctuaries themselves, I'm curious about what brought you to this and what spurred you to want to do that investigative process back in the 80s. What was that moment of enlightenment for you?
For me, it was really a process. I first learned about how animals are mistreated in the farming industry from my grandmother when I was in high school. And she told me about how calves that are raised for veal are chained by the neck in crates for their whole lives. And from high school, I said I would never eat veal. But then in college, I started learning more about the factory farming industry, including how inefficient it is, how we could feed more people with less land and fewer resources through plant-based agriculture, and that it was actually possible to live well as a vegan. You know, when I grew up, you know, I was led to believe that you needed meat for protein or you needed cow's milk for calcium, you know, and I came to realize that you did not need those animal products. And then ultimately just thought to myself, if I can live well without causing unnecessary harm, why wouldn't I? So I went vegan in 1985 and wanted to do something about this horrible industry that most people were unwittingly participating in by buying meat, milk, and eggs and paying for this and supporting financially in this horrible industry that I believe is outside of what most people think is okay. So our early thinking around it was we would go in, document conditions, expose the public to what was happening, and people, once they learned how bad it was, would go vegan. It was a pretty simple kind of idea. But, you know, I think people, when they see this, don't feel good about it and would rather not participate in it. But now I think what is starting to happen, thankfully, are more businesses, you know, like Green Fair, for example, cafe in Herndon, and other restaurants are making vegan food accessible and tasty and showing people how to do this instead of just showing why it makes sense. And so, but we started really with just wanting to stop the cruelty and injustice of factory farming and encourage citizens ultimately to live in a way that is more aligned with their own humanity, their own compassion, because I think most people are compassionate and would rather not support this horrible industry. I think also most people would rather eat food that doesn't make them sick and would also rather support a food system that doesn't destroy the planet the way animal agriculture does. So there are so many reasons to be doing this work, and I believe all of them. And a whole other one has to do with inequity and social injustice, where, you know, folks that work in slaughterhouses, for example, or people who live near factory farms also suffer. And people who live in parts of the country where they cannot get healthy plant-based food also suffer. Billions of animals suffer. So this is a system that is predicated on abuse and oppression, exploitation and extraction. I think most people would rather live differently, live in a more compassionate, connected, mutually beneficial way. So that's, you know, started as the driving force and continues as the driving force at Farm Sanctuary.
I'm curious, the investigative work that you did, the old reporter in me, you know, that just kind of bleeped on my radar there a little bit. I was like, oh, okay, how did you go about putting this together? I'm assuming you don't have a journalism background. So boy, how did you figure out, like, okay, I want to do this, let's infiltrate this, but I don't know how. So how did you get through that process?
Yeah, well, my undergraduate degree is in sociology. So I'm interested in social structures, social systems, social constructs. But I was not, as you say, a journalist, but ultimately kind of became one. And that happened by visiting these places and just recording and documenting what was happening. And exposing, for example, when downed animals, which was one of our big campaigns in the 80s and 90s, and actually even continues today, a downed animal is one who is too sick even to stand and walk. And these animals were routinely being left to die, sometimes thrown in trash cans or left on piles of dead animals, sometimes left in alleyways or pens for hours or days without vet care. And so we started by rescuing those individuals and documenting it. And then we started campaigning to prevent downed animals from being sent to the stockyards to be sold in the first place. And over time, we were able to achieve a national prohibition on slaughtering down cattle, down cows for human food. But it really started by going in, documenting, and then trying to advocate for reforms. And the way I used to go into these places was I would just walk in, you know, I think, and some of them are open to the public. Stockyards, for example, are livestock markets with an auction ring where animals are bought and sold. And if you showed up wearing overalls and boots, you know, people assumed you were somebody who was a farmer and might be interested in buying animals. So that was I spent a lot of time at stockyards in the early days. I also went into slaughterhouses and other factory farms where it is not open to the public. And in those cases, I just walked in. In some cases, you had, big trucks that were driving in and out. So there was a pretty big path to just wander in. And if I'd see somebody, I would wave to them and they would wave back. And these are big factory farms. So they don't know who works there and who doesn't. So I was able to gain access that way as well. And, found animals, again, in very bad conditions, animals left for dead, and would rescue them and care for them. And that's how the sanctuaries began.
Seeing those conditions, though, how difficult was that for you? Because you had that compassion instilled in you in such a young age, and then you go to a place like that and you see these types of atrocities. That could not have been easy for you.
Oh no, it was very difficult. And being able to rescue the animals and watching the animals heal was a very important part for me and for my colleagues. And it was a way to heal, and that way we could focus on something positive, something that we could do to make a positive difference, instead of recognizing that there were millions of animals, billions every year in the system that we could not help. And that's why we need to continue working on systemic reforms. But having the sanctuaries as places of healing, spending time with animals who were recovering, was a way for us also to heal and to recover from witnessing this, time and time again. And when I was doing the investigations, I was really, and I don't really do it now. I mean, I'll occasionally visit a place, but nothing like I used to. But I would become very task oriented. The idea was, you get in there, you get the footage, you document what's happening, and you get out. And sometimes you have to run because they're coming after you. There were a few times I was in these places and people would, come after me. So, and then sometimes it would really hit me afterwards when I'd be looking at the videotape that I just took, and remembering those animals are still there and I can't help them. So that to me was sometimes one of the hard parts. But focusing on the animals at the sanctuary who had been liberated and who are now going to be given a good life was a way to kind of deal with that whole situation. But it also speaks to a bigger issue when it comes to animal rescue. And an old friend of mine, Jim Mason, who wrote this book, Animal Factories with Peter Singer in like 1980, mentioned that, animal rescue is like the crack cocaine of the animal movement, because it's a fix, right? You see all these horrible things and you want to fix them, and you rescue the animal, it feels good, so you want to do it again. So rescue is important, but ultimately we need to change the system. There is no sanctuary that can rescue the billions of animals who deserve to be rescued. And it's great that there are farm sanctuaries, but that's only part of the work that is necessary, I think.
I feel like we would need hours and hours, if not days and weeks, to really talk about how it is that we could rectify the system right now that is clearly so very much broken. So let's stick with the positive for the time remaining that we do have, and talk about the sanctuary. So once that animal gets rescued, talk about the process for introducing them to the sanctuary and nursing them back to health.
Yeah, well, when animals come to farm sanctuary, we give them a very careful check over to make sure they don't have anything contagious. So they first come and they're kept in an isolated area, and they're given the best care possible, depending on, what their condition is. They might go directly to a veterinarian. In some cases, they actually need surgery. And then as they recover, and as we know that they don't have anything contagious, we start thinking about, okay, who will they get along with? What part of this community will they fit well in? And sometimes there are individuals at the farm who, don't really get along with some others. And so a new arrival might be introduced to one of these other individuals who doesn't have close relationships with others, to see how that goes. So in terms of integrating them, the context is considered, and where they best fit is part of the process. And then once they are introduced to herd mates or flock mates, they're monitored to make sure that they're getting along well and everybody's, doing good together. And then they become part of the sanctuary community. And, one of the things that I've noticed over the years is how when animals first come to us, they're very fearful, because when they've interacted with people, it's usually meant something painful. Pigs have their tails cut off, for example, and things like this. So they're afraid of people. But when they come to the sanctuary, they're treated with kindness and they start realizing that. But the animals at the sanctuary are also not afraid of people. The animals at the sanctuary are, I think, signaling to the new arrivals that this is a safe place, just because it is so much more peaceful, so much less stressful than anything these animals have ever witnessed or experienced before. When you go into a factory farm, you can hear the animals clanking against the bars and the cages and the crates. The air is thick with, ammonia. And it's just a violent, stressful place for everybody. The sanctuary is an open, sanctuary. It's very different. And then the animals are not afraid. And when new arrivals see that, I think they recognize that they're safe. And it's beautiful to watch them heal and to come out of their shells. And, animals who couldn't walk in some cases begin to walk. And then they begin to run. Then they begin to kick up their heels and they begin to play and they begin to express themselves. And it's a beautiful, joyful thing to see. And that's really what the sanctuary is about. It's about healing from this oppressive system. And it's about creating a safe place for individuals to express themselves and to be themselves and not to be worried about somebody coming and doing harm to them.
How long would you say on average? I'm sure it does vary by individual. That point is not lost to me, by the way. Side note, that is not lost on me how you refer to the animals as individuals. That to me says that you have the utmost respect for every single animal that you have rescued and is on Farm Sanctuary.
Yes.
So
absolutely. Yeah, and they, different animals will live for different lengths of time, and what has happened though in our food system is they've been genetically bred for specific production traits. And in the case of chickens that are bred for meat, they've been genetically bred to grow 4 times bigger and faster than normal. So their hearts and lungs have a hard time supporting their growth rate. And in the industry, millions die every year of heart attacks at just a couple of weeks old. So once they come to us, we put them on a very high fiber diet and we try to prevent them from putting on too much weight, but they still have this genetic makeup that, makes it so that they often don't live that long. They'll live several years. But, for these chickens, living 8 or more years is pretty rare. In the case of cows, we've had cows live well over 20 years. But most, 20 is about a pretty good average age. In the case of pigs, they have also been genetically bred to grow fast and large, and they are killed at 6 months old in the industry. When they come to us, again, they have this genetics. So they can get to weigh close to 1,000 pounds. So here again, we have to be very careful not to feed them too many calories and give them very high fiber diets again, to try to maintain a weight down around 400, 500 pounds. So that their legs can support their bodies. And here, these animals might live, 8 to 10 years. And in the case of goats and sheep, they'll, maybe go up 15, 20 years. And turkeys are similar to the birds that are raised for meat, bred to grow very big and heavy. So maybe 8 years is a pretty long life for a turkey. And chickens that are raised for eggs can live longer, although they also have genetic issues connected to egg production. And sometimes they end up with reproductive disorders, but just physically, they're not as big as a meat type bird, so they could potentially live longer.
Talk about the relationships that you develop with these individuals as you bring them to the farm sanctuary. You nurse them back to health. And even though they're not living the longest of lives, I mean, you just mentioned the pigs typically being slaughtered at 6 months, but there they can live for years, if not longer than that. Talk about the relationships that you build over that time with these individuals.
Yeah, it's humans and other animals develop deep bonds and connections, just like animals and other animals develop deep bonds and connections. And that's all allowed to occur at Farm Sanctuary. Now, I'm not on the farm on a daily basis, so I can't speak to what's happening there right now, but I can talk a little bit about some of the experiences I had and what I observed while I was on the farm on a regular basis. And I remember these two pigs we had, Hope and Johnny. And Hope was an older pig, and she had a bad back leg. So she had a hard time getting around. And Johnny was much younger, and he became her protector, you know. And when we would go out to feed Hope and all the other pigs, Johnny would stand guard to make sure nobody else came and got Hope's food. And it kind of gave him purpose. But then as time went, you know, Hope was much older, and she died, and Johnny was just, you know, depressed and broken up about it. And, you know, although he was young, he died within a couple of weeks of that. And, you know, it's sort of like he didn't have a purpose. He had lost hope, you know, and it was a very sad thing to watch, but it was very telling about how deep these animals' emotions are. And we've had other animals too who form very close bonds. And when one of their friends dies, they wail, and they'll go into depression. And sometimes they don't come out of it. Usually they do, but sometimes they don't. And they're social animals who have relationships. And you know, it's beautiful to see, you know, but it's also heartbreaking to realize how these animals are mistreated in the food system, and how people don't get to know them as individuals with feelings, with relationships, with memories. And some friends of mine had lived on a kibbutz in Israel where there was a turkey farm that raised turkeys by the thousands. And the turkey farmer said that, oh, these are dumb animals. And again, he was treating them as commodities, not as individuals. And so this was his perspective. Then a couple of these turkeys escaped and ended up living at my friend's place. And this turkey farmer came over, and he got to see these two individual turkeys. And one was very shy, and the other was very outgoing. And he was really struck by the fact that they were individuals with different personalities. And this turkey farmer, who had previously said, oh, they're all dumb, they're all the same, recognized, oh, this one has these qualities, that one has those. They're different, they're individuals. And so that is allowed to occur all the time at Farm Sanctuary, and different people connect with different individual animals. And again, animals with other particular animals, they have friendships and relationships that are complex. And at Farm Sanctuary, we try to honor those. So in addition to caring for animals, we adopt animals out into good homes. And if there is a bonded pair, or, you know, individuals who are very close friends or a family, we try to adopt those out together, because again, this is their community, and we want to honor that, we want to respect that, and we want to support that.
Suppose somebody's interested in adopting the animals. What is the adoption process? Can you walk us through that, what the criteria is?
Yeah, well, you know, of course, number one is that these animals will be treated as friends, not food. They'll be given all the care they need. And we have an adoption process. People can go to our website, farmsanctuary.org, and, you know, click their way through the shelters if you're interested in adopting an animal. And in addition to adopting animals from our sanctuaries in New York and California, we organize a network of homes. So if there's, you know, maybe a home, and people that are interested in other parts of the country also let us know, because there might be animals in those parts of the country who need a home. So we also refer other sanctuaries and other animals in need to homes. And we're always looking for homes. There are billions of animals who are mistreated every year in this industry. And the more homes we have, the more animals that can be saved.
For those who haven't been to the Farm Sanctuary, any of the locations, could you kind of do what I would call a scene setter, just kind of bring us there, describe what it is that is actually there? They haven't taken the virtual tour yet. So what is Farm Sanctuary? Describe that for us.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, it's a place where the animals are our friends, not our food. These are cows, pigs, chickens, goats, sheep, turkeys. And when you enter the farm at our place in Watkins Glen, it says You're now entering the animal sanctuary. Please remember you're a guest in their home. So we really want to set the tone that this is the animal sanctuary. And we also let people know that these animals have come from abuse situations. They may still have some trauma, and that we want to respect them and approach them very gently. And if they come up to us, great. But if they don't want to come up to us, that's fine. If they want to stay away from us, that's fine. And there's plenty of space at the sanctuary. So at our farms, we have areas for cows who like grazing space. We have different areas for chickens and turkeys and pigs. Pigs like to wallow, so we have like mud areas and ponds for where the pigs are. We have, pastures for the chickens and turkeys too, because they like to range and peck at the ground and check out for food and stuff. But it's a place where you can wander through, and we do guided tours and tell the animal stories so you understand who these animals are and where they came from, and how treating them with kindness is actually good for the animals, but it's also good for us. So, and we have visitor programs, and we have events that we host, every year. For Thanksgiving, for example, we do our celebration for the turkeys, where the turkeys are the guests of honor, and people can come. We have a great vegan meal, and then we feed the turkeys. We set up a table, put out pumpkin pie and stuffing and squash and cranberries, and then we all sit there and just enjoy as the turkeys dig in. And it's just the smiles on people's faces, the smiles on kids' faces is just a beautiful thing. So we just interact with these animals as our friends, as our companions, as our fellow earthlings, and that's what Farm Sanctuary is about. And people are more than welcome to come visit. And there are also farm sanctuaries in other parts of the world as well. And it's a great place to recognize that pigs are not that different than dogs, for instance. And pigs love belly rubs. We have these pigs, you walk up, touch their tummy, they flop over for a belly rub. Turkeys are also very friendly, and they'll follow you around like puppy dogs in the yard, because now they know, again, they're in a safe place instead of at a factory farm where they would run away from people. At Farm Sanctuary, many of them will run to people. Some of them still prefer to keep their distance, and that's okay. But it's just a beautiful place where people and farm animals have a chance to interact in a positive way. And it's good for everybody. Scientific research has shown that when we interact with animals in a positive way, it helps to lower our blood pressure. It helps to lower our stress. It improves our lives. And if you contrast that with what it's like to work in a factory farm or slaughterhouse, the difference is profound and obvious. And I think most people would rather be at a sanctuary as opposed to at a slaughterhouse.
Oh, no question about that. And as we kind of wrap up here, I think that, maybe something that a lot of people are wondering about, we're hearing some reports now of some animals coming down with COVID-19. Are any extra precautions being put in place at Farm Sanctuary to protect the animals?
Yes. No, we're being very careful at the farm. We're doing the social distancing. Our people are wearing the masks, and only folks who need to be on the farms are on the farms. So yes, we have taken precautions and want to do everything we can to minimize any sort of risk. But it's a strange time. It's a strange time. And, hopefully with our animals, they have open spaces. They're generally pretty healthy, although they often do come in with ailments. So that is a concern. But we try to create the healthiest environment possible where their immune systems and their stress levels are going to predispose them to less problems, hopefully.
Well, Gene, I would love to have you back on the exam room at some point and talk more about the diets that these animals are on. I was laughing so hard on the inside when you were talking about how the animals are put on a high fiber diet, because that is the cornerstone of any plant-based diet. And so here we are, nursing animals back to health using the very same diet that we as humans turn to. So I just think that is a fascinating topic of discussion.
Really interesting, right? It's all connected. It's all connected.
It really, really is. So farmsanctuary.org is the website. You can also find them on Twitter and Instagram at Farm Sanctuary. Gene Baur, thank you so very much, not just for joining us today here at the virtual Fairfax Veg Fest, but for everything you and your team at Farm Sanctuary are doing. It is really just remarkable, everything that you guys have put together and how you're helping to rescue these animals, these individuals. That's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chuck. Really enjoyed it. Have a great day.
All right.